The Xeno series of video games is one of gaming scene's weirdest out there, in that it's technically several series held by several different rights holders whose solidifying identities remain usually with the creator, themes present, or general statements made. The name Xeno itself means foreign or strange, which is honestly a perfect descriptor of the series as a whole. The Xeno series of games originated on the original PlayStation in the form of Xenogears by Square, led by the husband and wife pair Tetsuya Takahashi and Kaori Tanaka, who frequently goes by her pen name online, Saga, has exploded into a cult following project that has led them from Square to Bandai Namco to finally Nintendo, where it rests today as a near flagship RPG series on the Nintendo Switch. This series is near and dear to my heart as my favorite video game franchise of all time, coming just barely ahead of Zero Escape and Pokemon franchises. Xeno means a whole heck of a lot to me, and it is my mission statement with this series of analytical videos to show you exactly why I regard it so highly. This houses the story of Xenogears, or as I like to call it, my favorite story of all time. That is a high bar to place, but we'll talk more about it next time. I don't want to keep you here too long, but until then, stand tall and shake the heavens. First, we're going to summarize and analyze the events of the game itself, and then once we reach the end, we'll tackle the information inside of Perfect Works. See what information we can tie into Xenogears directly, and what information we'll have to keep in the back of our minds. Once that is complete, we'll move on successively to each Xeno game moving forward, and referring back to Perfect Works and any new material that comes out to tie everything all together. Got that set? Great. For our first step on this journey, we gotta head back to 1998 and take a look at Xenogears. Keep in mind this X. Way down the line, we'll be bringing this symbol back up in ways you definitely won't expect. Then we come to a verse from the Bible, specifically Revelation 22:13. This verse here implies the existence of a being with power greater than that of the world. To exist is the first, and to continue to exist until its last. That everything in between is lesser and of lower denomination. We begin on a gigantic ship out in the far reaches of space. An ominous track plays in the background as it pans over what looks to be a colonized center for some sort of human transportation, as if there are large-scale evacuations from somewhere. We scan over the top of the ship again until we reach a source of distress.
This is an emergency. Level 1 alert.
Omega 1 restarting. Alpha 1 genome restructuring.
So, knowing about the events of this game and what goes on in Perfect Works, I know what this technobabble means. But to avoid spoilers, I'll translate without revealing all of the specific secrets. I'll basically analyze what we can infer based on what we see. Omega 1 here is a codename for something that is present on the ship, and Alpha 1 genome refers to some sort of biological mass, whether it be cells or tissue, and the fact that it is some form of life being transported on the ship, assumingly different than the humans on board in the colonized sectors. It's implied that Omega 1 might be the name for the outer layer or overall structure of the object or being, and Alpha 1 is the inner underlying brain or control center. And whatever it may be, it's restarting itself, assuming of its own volition. Its sending alarm signals implies that it was believed to be unconscious or offline, and restructuring implies that it is rebuilding possibly parts of itself that have previously been put in that state.
Confirming exon replacement. Base code 85 million. 100 million. Its speed is overwhelming.
Confirming exon replacement. Okay, so an exon is any part of a gene that encodes a part of the final RNA sequence after introns, their counterpart, have been removed by RNA splicing. Exon basically refers to the DNA sequence within a gene and the corresponding sequence in RNA transcripts. Thank you, Wikipedia, for being an unyielding resource. Basically, it's confirming that Alpha 1 is indeed restructuring and rebuilding its own DNA. A fact we can see clear here in this image has been cut over to what we can assume to be Alpha 1, but not necessarily Omega 1, looks like. Almost like a nucleus of the entire system. And the live feed confirms that it's rapidly speeding up its cellular regeneration.
Alpha 1 to raise your central. Access confirmed. Initializing fake net. Disconnected. Activating emergency shelter. Denied. Contamination is spreading widely. Captain.
Okay, so there's a lot here. First, let's tackle Raziel Central. Alpha 1 seems to be connecting to some sort of service or connection point dubbed Raziel Central. Raziel is a direct reference to the Archangel Raziel of Jewish mysticism. He is known as the Keeper of Secrets and the Angel of Mysteries, so we can extrapolate that the Raziel Central is possibly something similar of a database or a knowledge or secrets that the crew members generally would like to protect or keep safe, of which Alpha 1 is accessing seems to be very, very concerning. So in order to prevent this, they attempt to initialize a fake net, and it shows them trying to deter Alpha 1's access by digitally throwing it off the trail. However, as we hear, they're disconnected. And so they try to activate the emergency shelter, which sounds like an emergency backup to preserve information in case they need to wipe Raziel.
Cut off the cables manually.
Roger. Activating self-destruct bolts. Confirming. No good, nothing happened. Omega 1, they are attacking. We can't stop them. 98% of our weapons have been taken over. The autopilot system Faust has been accessed, and its phase space logic is being rewritten. Ergo area is increasing. An internal plane is forming. Switching to space displacement mode.
Alpha 1, confirming transfer of coordinate codes. Coordinates input, coordinate NX128, EZ061, the main planet.
Damn, so they're planning on attacking. Engine room. Activate the emergency sealing system. Engine room. Engine.
So here, an autopilot system is being directly referenced and seemingly hijacked by Alpha 1. Phase space logic being rewritten sounds like a method of travel through space by utilizing space-time distortion, meaning that Alpha 1 is trying to reroute the ship's destination. Phase space logic being rewritten probably as a means of futuristic space travel utilizing space-time distortion. Argo area and internal plane seem to be lingo use related to their ship's methods of space travel, similar to the ship entering space displacement mode. Then we get coordinates for the main planet, which is most likely the origin of Omega/Alpha 1. The displays on the screens here read, "Ye shall be as gods." This is a biblical quote from Genesis 3:5 when Eve is tempted with the fruit of knowledge. The serpent quotes this very line to her in temptation. This will not be the last time we see this quote used in this series.
See that all civilians and passengers are safely transported to the escape shuttles. I will send a dispatch after evacuation is complete. I am evacuating the ship. All of you, evacuate now.
Evacuate. Evacuate. Evacuate the ship immediately. All passengers please board the shuttles in a calm and orderly fashion.
Most players that experience that introduction believe that we'll get context or answers to literally any of these scenes immediately or shortly after. Nope. Keep these scenes in your mind, but they will go as mysteries until much, much, much later in our story. I will be replaying them when we have more context and filling information that we were previously guessing at, because there is a whole lot of context that we're missing out on. What we do get is a bit of a lore dump for the history of the planet that the game we're playing takes place on. In light of reading the entire dump from beginning to end, let me just summarize the key points. War has been raging on the largest continent, Ignis, of the planet for hundreds of years. The two sides of the war are the Kislev Empire in the north and the Kingdom of Av in the south. The war has gone on for so long that people involved don't even remember how it began, just that both sides believe it to be the other side's fault. However long the war had gone on, there was soon going to be a shift in the amount of danger it placed in the world due to a third party going by the name of the Ethos, or in the Japanese version, the Church. The Ethos is an institution that acts outside the interests of any one party in the war to preserve the world's culture, repairing recovered weapons, tools, and artifacts found within the planet. Several weapons were found under the surface of the Earth as gears, giant humanoid robots that could be piloted by skilled pilots. Both sides of the war effort rushed to excavate as many gears as they could, and have the Ethos repair them for combat use. As the war continued, with this new gear threat added into the mix, the Kislev Empire managed to gain an upper hand, as the ruins of their lands contained many more resources for them to repair and utilize against Av. Suddenly, out of nowhere, a mysterious military force named Gebler arrived at the last moment, and helped Av out of a dire situation and allied themselves with the kingdom. With the help of the Gebler forces, Av began mounting counterattacks and gaining momentum against the Empire. Our story begins proper in a small village that is very close to the Av-Kislev border named Lahan. Technically an Avian province, but the village was close enough to either side that you could look one way and find a different global power staring down your doorstep. This is where our tale begins. Buildings burn and fires cause panic as the townspeople fear from gigantic mechs, gears that are overrunning the village. One of them is piloted by a young man named Faye. He seems to be at odds with the other pilots as he tackles one down, although it stands back up almost immediately. A man named Seitan warns him from the danger that he must not fight here, but Faye is too preoccupied with defending his village that he continues on. The scene shifts to the burning embers in the background, and we fade out into a painting, painted by the very same man, Faye, recounting a terrible nightmare he had the night before. Here we get immediately fully introduced to Fei Fong Wong, the protagonist of this story, as an 18-year-old who loves to paint and express himself. A quick aside, but Fei's name actually has history in Chinese folklore. The legendary hero Wang Fei Hung. He was a martial artist and a local folk hero who became the subject of numerous martial arts films. We'll get to see more of this inspiration later on. For now, we take control of Fei and explore Lahan village to our heart's content. In doing so, we learn a few facts. By talking to the maid who works inside Fei's home, we learn that he's not actually a native of Lahan, but he was brought here 3 years ago by a man in a mask. We get a flashback to the scene where the maid recalls Fei being all bloodied and traumatized on that fateful night. We see a fully robed figure walk up to the chief's house, and the scene fades away. The maid and Fei wonder if the masked man was Fei's father, just handing him off. Before moving forward, we also learn that Fei's best friend Timothy is getting married to his other best friend Alice the next day, and that Alice's younger brother, Dan, another one of Fei's friends, doesn't approve of Timothy, and instead wishes Fei were the one to get to marry Alice and become his brother-in-law. Dan is a little bit of a miscreant, but he has fun with Fei, and Fei is usually the one to clean up his messes. In conversation with Timothy, Fei affirms to us that he doesn't have any memories before he arrived in Lahan village. He's had to start from square one. But the other villagers took extremely well to him, and he's had many enduring friendships since then, but can't help but wonder who he was before arriving at Lahan. Fei can talk to many of the other townsfolk, but their conversations aren't as important for the purposes of this video. One thing we can find, though, is a cameo to Chrono Trigger inside the town shop. This is Luca, a character from Chrono Trigger whose appearance here is mainly a visual tie to the fact that at one point this game was being worked on as a sequel to Chrono Trigger. Yasunori Mitsuda, the composer of Chrono Trigger, also being this game's composer, makes enough sense. Luca here explains to us how save points work, by the way of these memory cubes that dot the world. They're tall golden monolith-like structures that one can compress memories into a restorable format, basically saving a game. Next, Faye heads off to Alice's house, who is trying on her wedding dress before her big day. Faye is told that normally men aren't allowed to see the bride on the day before her wedding, but because of their close relationship, that can be seen as an exception. Inside, we learn from Alice's aunt that 10 years ago both her and Dan's parents passed away, so both children were placed in the care of their aunt and uncle. She places pride in Alice by saying she's happy that she turned out better than okay from the situation, but expresses concern over Dan's state of affairs, as she's aware of his more mischievous side. Already we have a deeper understanding for Dan's inner psyche and why he acts out in the way that he does. He's more than just a snotty kid who enjoys annoying other people, and we see that with his attachment to Faye, who he almost sees as another role model in his life in someone similar circumstances as he. Heading upstairs, Faye sees Alice. She's been staring at her wedding dress, saying she's just finished it up. Faye congratulates her on her work and her oncoming wedding. The two share a moment of silence before speaking at the same time. An obvious tension can be felt, and you wonder if they both have feelings for each other, as well as for Timothy. Alice changes the subject and asks how Dan's doing, which Faye responds as she expects, that he's as rambunctious as ever. She then asks if Faye can do an errand for her, fetch a camera from Dr. Uzuki's house up in the mountains. Alice is thankful, and acts a bit coy, asking what things would be like if Faye had been born in the village, and they'd known each other for longer, and then letting the thought fade as Faye wonders himself, giving confirmation to my previous assumptions. Alice wonders of her fate, and then chides herself for being foolish. Faye leaves and then heads up towards Dr. Uzuki's. Here we get an introduction to the combat system of this game, which, for the purposes of this series, we're not going to go into too heavily. The only thing I'm going to mention is that during the battle, Faye's battle stance and animations take direct inspiration from martial arts, and we can see that he takes direct inspiration from his namesake. Up at Dr. Uzuki's hut, we get to explore around a little bit and meet the good doctor's family. First, we have Yui, his wife, and Midori, his daughter. Yui welcomes him to the home and says that her husband is out tinkering with his junk in the backyard.
Oh my! Oh my!
Faye heads out back to find Dr. Uzuki, only to come across a great explosion. Faye finds the doc, named Saiton, the same man from the beginning the nightmare Faye had, tinkering with his junk indeed. Saiton tells Faye to wait for him to finish up. He can look at the interesting item in the storeroom while he waits. Faye heads inside and we get this little scene. Afterward, Faye enjoys a nice dinner with the Uzuki family. He thanks them like the proper gentleman that he is, and Saiten says that he'll bring the camera equipment to the village himself, as it doesn't ease his mind to have Faye lugging it around. Faye harbors an honest nostalgia to this worry, but thanks him and heads off into the night back home. Saiten doubles back to make sure Faye is careful on the way home, and Faye reassures him that absolutely nothing will go wrong. Up in the sky, gears in pursuit of a lone gear can be seen. Faye regards them as giants. Looks like Faye is not the only one who's caught wind of them, as Saiten catches up immediately to get the scoop. Faye mentions that they're headed towards Lahan, and Saiten reveals that they must be gears from Kislev, at least the ones in the majority pursuing are. An explosion rings out and the two rush back down to the town immediately. Events of Faye's nightmare turn into a reality as the gears in pursuit lay the village to flames in search of the soul gear. Buildings are burning and Saiten finds Alice and Timothy standing outside panicking. Saiten urges them to stay safe, but Alice wonders for Dan. Timothy urges that he cannot leave Dan behind, especially if he's going to be family. Saiten calms his heroic urge and says his duty is to protect Alice, that Faye and him will ensure that Dan is safe. Hesitant but sure, Timothy agrees. Alice tasks Faye with finding Dan. Once set, Saiten says he's going to investigate the houses to save any left behind, and Faye is to coordinate those outside to a safe destination. Once they split, Faye comes face to face with three pursuing gears firing a large gun at the singular gear, who seems to be standing still in its battle pose, unmoving. The sounds and images of the gunfire stun Faye completely, and a stray shot knocks him closer to the singular gear. In a moment of confused reflection on locked memories and a nightmare so closely relived, followed by a swinging chain, Faye enters the gear. Saiten takes note of this and calls out for Faye, who is unresponsive. Faye powers up the gear and enters his battle stance to Saiten's disparages. Faye charges in against the pursuing gears, and the second half of the gameplay is revealed. By expending fuel and what is known as ether energy, more on that later, pilots can maneuver gears to fight much larger battles than they ever could on foot. Faye manages to take down quite a few of the opposing gears, seemingly without ever having operated every one of these missions. But reinforcements soon arrive. At the command of a singular black gear with a menacing look, Faye goes in for more. We cut to Saiten, who is worrying about him awakening here if Faye continues to fight like this. Saiten finds Dan, who catches him from the window. Dan apologizes for staying, but he had to come back to save Alice's wedding dress. He couldn't bear the thought of her effort going to waste. Saiten urges at his sentimentality, but suggests they move to a safer location. He mentions that Faye is inside the gear protecting them, and at this comment he mentions that Faye is bound by a dark, cruel destiny of God, which only confuses Dan and the player. At this, Timothy arrives on the scene, having come back for Dan, but it's at this moment Faye jumps in front of Timothy and urges the others to stop shooting. The black gear does not cease, instead ordering another round of fire. dark memory flashes behind Faye's eyes, and he goes berserk, destroying everything around him. In this state, Lahan is destroyed. His two best friends are killed, but the great cost is enough to drive off the intruders. Faye wakes the morning after the assault. Citan stands near the group of the remaining survivors, who stare at Faye in fear. Dan hits the hardest as he blames Faye for the death of his sister. He tells Faye that he's never going to forgive him, and he runs off. Citan seems to be the only person who placates Faye's distress, saying that it's probably best that Faye leave the others alone, that he head toward the Black Moon Forest to the southeast. Upset, but not wanting to cause any further harm, he leaves. He journeys into the Black Moon Forest, not quite sure what's propelling him other than disgust over himself. If he hadn't gotten inside that gear, if he hadn't fought back, then they could still be alive. They could have escaped. Faye keeps walking through the forest until he comes face to face with a red hair, who has a gun pointed at him.
Ranahos! Katinayu tat vadaintuna akva. Valna rantak. Rana kalti! Throw down your weapon. Make one wrong move and I'll shoot.
She speaks to him in a commanding language he cannot understand. She transitions into a language that he can, the so-called language of the lambs, or surface dwellers. She tells him that she's tasked with eliminating any land she comes across. Faye welcomes the invitation for death, as he believes he deserves it as penance for what happened in Lahan. This confuses the woman, who is expecting him to beg for his life or attempt to fight back. In her moment of confusion, a forest dweller sneaks up behind her and knocks her out, preparing to attack further. Faye calls out her name, Ellie, not realizing where from within him this knowledge springs from, but to his subconscious, that doesn't matter. He jumps into action and protects her from the forest dweller. He's successful and tends to her wounds. Faye sets up camp as night surrounds him. As she wakes, she wonders why he jumped in to protect her. He plays it off and says that she should be thankful he didn't leave her to die, but then suggests that they both work together to get out of the forest, that going alone would probably mean the end for both parties. Ellie agrees to this and introduces herself to Faye, Elhaim Van Houten. He notes that he already knew her name. Confused, he introduces himself as well. As they prepare to sleep, Faye dreams of a strange scene in the desert.
Wait! Hey! Don't leave me here! Wait!
You must be lonely here by yourself. Faye. Faye.
Faye.
And Faye wakes up to the real Ellie calling out his name. As he wakes, they talk more on the situation that they were now involved in. Ellie questions Faye on why he was so ready to die when they met. Faye reveals that he feels guilty for the destruction of Lahan, that all those people wouldn't have died if he didn't step into that gear. Ellie rejects his musings and doubles down, calling him a coward for running away, and tells him he can't put the blame on anyone but himself.
You talk as if it's not your responsibility.
No. I didn't do anything.
They died because you had to pilot the gear and start fighting.
It wasn't me, can't you understand?
Not just anyone can pilot those machines, you know.
I didn't do it.
Why won't you take responsibility?
I'm not so strong.
Why are you trying to put the blame on others?
I'm not even all that talented.
You're a coward!
That's right. I'm a coward.
The duality of her own failings and the echoes they ring through the present ring true. Faye accepts his cowardly nature, but before they can continue, Ellie is taken off guard when she encounters a beast larger than anything else. Her screams launch Faye into action. He sees the form of the Rancor Dragon, a massive beast of terrifying stature. Unable to handle the beast with his bare fists, he doesn't know what to do. Citan comes into the fray with the black gear Faye piloted previously in tow, Veltal. He calls for Faye to pilot the gear again, a request more than hesitant to enter, but when it comes to saving Ellie from the beast, he hops in without another thought. Piloting Veltal, he beats on the beast long enough to free Ellie. He stays in control of himself, and he exits the gear, still wary of its destructive power. Citan rejoins the duo after the dust settles, and is glad to know that Faye is still alive. The three make camp for the night, and Faye falls asleep. Citan speaks to Ellie, alone. They speak of Faye, and Citan expresses his concern for keeping Faye safe. He then speaks to Ellie in the high language she had spoken before she was in prison company, saying that he noticed another gear was left on the outskirts of Laha, implying that it was Ellie's, and she ditched it to run into the forest to escape the attack. He says he knows where she's from, and that she should leave the two of them alone, escape into the night. Faye, awake this entire time, thinks on these events as the night moves forward. When they wake, Citan reveals that a few parts of Veltal are busted from the fight with the Rancor Dragon, pieces relating to the knee joint and a circuit. He says they can be fixed, but they need to continue out of the forest. Both of them do finally make it out during the next day, and they find the forest's edge as sands greet them in the low dunes. In the distance, they travel to Dazil, the first town on Av's border. It's a small outpost for scavengers and traders alike. Citan takes Veltal to get it fixed, and while he and Faye discuss the merits of fixing it all, since Faye considers that the last time he ever wants to pilot it, Citan counters by saying that power is wielded by those that have the responsibility to protect others. It's here in Dazil that Faye learns of the Ethos and their excavation rigs to uncover the artifacts buried in the planet's depths for both sides of the war between Av and Kislev. Faye, while waiting for the parts and repairs to complete, adventures through Dazil until he makes it to the bar. Here, he encounters a man that will change his life forever. Big Joe! Hey, bada bing bing, wahoo! Joey Balboa here, and don't you forget about it.
Hey, where's the freaking gabagoo?
Joey Balboa, king of the Rockies, and here to take names and drink games to town drunk, and don't you forget about it. He shows what a manly presence, nay, a force he is when two excavators who are being a bit too loud for him to enjoy his drinking in peace. Faye continues to speak to old Big Joe Bada Bing Babino, and he learns some interesting things, like how Big Joe, hey, watch your pocket. He isn't interested in the global fight for money or weapons. He's just here to do whatever he pleases, and don't you forget about it. He then mysteriously says that he could introduce himself today, and tomorrow be a different person entirely. Leaving the bar for brighter pastures, Faye learns that Citan took the sand buggy out to the desert to locate parts they need for Veltal, as it's a gear from the Kislev Empire, so it would stand to reason they would need parts from a Kislev gear to repair it. Faye, hearing word of pirates that travel up the sand seas, heads out to the desert to find Citan. As he travels out, the dunes themselves grow in size. He finds a few gears from Av chasing an unknown source. Continuing forward, a powerful shadow casts over him, and he sees a gigantic flying saucer in the sky, shielded by an immense force field. It too is traveling in the same direction, but of course much faster. As the sun begins to set, Faye happens across some pirates riding sand buggies. He causes an accident for one of the riders and steals his buggy, feeling the need for speed. Faye catches up with the Gears from Av, who see and corner him between one another. They're about to fire on him until Citan saves the day, letting loose some gunfire with a now repaired Veltal. He bids for Faye to take down the Gears. Faye, realizing the danger remaining outside, does so. He jumps into the cockpit and takes care of both the Gears. Thinking they're safe, he rests for but a moment after the battle, but is immediately brought to attention when a familiar black ear calls out to him from the top of the mountain, backed by a blood moon. This gear was the one who was commanding the other Gears at the massacre at Lahan. Faye recognizes this immediately. He also flashes back to a point in the past that isn't fully clear.
Who are you? Right. I know you. You killed her. Her? No. It wasn't. Not me. You coward. It was you.
The pilot is a man in black, only named by a single name, Groff, the Seeker of Power. Groff challenges Faye's ideologies and baits him at how much power he displayed back in Lahan, and that he purposefully chased the other Gears toward Lahan to instigate the events of the massacre in order to awaken Faye's true power. Groff reveals that the grief over his loss and inability to emotionally handle it was the catalyst for the destruction itself. When Faye fights back, claiming he only intended to save the village and its people, Groff laughs. He says Faye's inner heart spoke the true words of its desires, and that blaming others for his problems is exactly what he thought Faye would do, as it's in his nature. Faye asks what Groff intends to do with his power. To destroy Mother God. After some more back and forth, Groff teases that he not only knows Faye's father, but they'd actually fought, leading to his father's death. Before answering more, Groff summons a gigantic sandworm to taste Faye's abilities. He taunts him to play along by withholding answers and leaves the scene. Faye fights and overpowers the worm, and exits Veltal to commune with Citan over the events they just witnessed. Turns out Veltal's repairs were only temporary fixes, and were not meant to hold in a fight like that. They are surrounded by more Gears from Av, and are taken in by an Imperial group. Veltal is strapped to the top of the Avean sand cruiser, and the both of them are taken prisoner. Through the night, Faye dreams of Groff and his father, standing at odds.
Let us join together.
I never thought we'd meet again like this. It must be fate. How ironic. But I'll never let you have him. Even if it kills me.
He wakes up in a small prison cell with Citan. He apologizes to Faye for not taking into account the fact that Av would be searching wildly for Veltal. Citan seems to guess correctly at the state of Faye's concerns, Groff and his father, and Groff's plans to get him inside that gear. Citan muses on the fact, but says that they'll be able to help nothing as prisoners. Faye gets back into bed to rest, but Citan stays awake, thinking more on the events that have happened. He questions if the man in black is truly who he said he was, and then wonders if they are approaching the time of the gospel. He flashes back to a time years ago, standing on a pedestal in a large, exorbitant room. He stands in front of a man in a skull mask, known here only as the Emperor. The Emperor explains that the time of the gospel is Citan, as the time when the people who were expelled from paradise to live on the surface of the earth shall return to God in paradise and live there eternally. Then, he says something very interesting.
We, the Gazel, must find God's resting place by then and resurrect him.
Back from his thoughts, he stares at Faye before wondering if these truly are the end times. We cut then to a view of a ship that, from a telescope's point of view, sand pirates have caught view of the now Kislev model gear, meaning Veltal, and plan to strike to keep it out of the hands of someone named Shakan. We see the leader of the pirates fire a command to strike. He's a young blonde man who has an eye patch over one eye, named Bart Fatimi. They lock and load on the side of the vessel, unleashing a fell blast. Back inside the ship, Faye is awoken by the blast, and Citan says they've sustained damage, and it was likely the ship was going to sink. They escape through a hole made in the other side of their cell. As the ship sinks, they fend off the soldiers who are panicking from the attack. Faye and Citan split up. Citan makes his way toward the ship's ward crane, and maneuvers it to bring Veltal to Faye. He climbs in the cockpit with no reservations, jumps into action, grabbing Citan into Veltal's hand as they escape the ship before it capsizes completely. Faye remarks that it seemed to respond automatically to what he wanted to do when they entered the cockpit. They're about to rest easy until 3 gears surround them from the pirate's vessel, the centermost one being the most visually stunning of them all. The voice calling from it, revealed to be Bart himself, questions their loyalty to Anna and their morality if they're so willing to let their squad members die so simply. Faye tries to explain that they're not soldiers of Al, but the situation doesn't help them out. Them leaping from an Av warship leads Bart to believe that they're lying. He challenges Faye to a fight. Faye's insistent on avoiding a fight at all costs, but this simply excites Bart for a fight more. Faye defends himself against Bart's onslaught, but the both of them get caught in quicksand. Both sides call for them to try to escape, but both Faye and Bart's gears are too deep in the quicksand. They fall underneath the surface into a cave full of stalactites below. When both pilots come to, they exit their gears. Bart is surprised by Faye's lack of a vain guard. He laughs off Faye's irritation over Bart's lack of listening. He introduces himself as the proper pirate that works this territory. Figuring their best chance of getting out is working together, they decided to pair up. Back on the pirate ship, Citan has met up with Bart's 2 retainers, a similarly eye-patched man named Sigurd Harcourt and a butler-like man named Maison. Citan learns that Bart's attack on the ship they were in was calculated, but Bart has a tendency to act out of haste and let his temper flare up. It's then revealed that Sigurd and Citan have actually met before. Sigurd refers to Citan as Hugo. He says he never would have believed they would have met down here, to which Citan agrees, saying it certainly must be an omen. Back down in the stalactite caves, Bart and Faye work together to move boulders clear of their path. They bicker for a bit over who's responsible for their being trapped, but finally come to a truce as they find a small sub-cavern they must exit their gears to investigate. Inside they find an old man, little more than a thin layer of flesh stretched over bone. He introduces himself as Old Man Bal, short of course for Balthazar, who is a biblical allusion to one of the 3 wise men who brought gifts to infant Jesus Christ. Balthazar is a fossicker, meaning he's a collector of artifacts deep within the cavern's depths. He guides the 2 men to the fossils he has lined up on his shelves, saying that they're lined up from oldest to youngest. Interestingly enough, he says human bones stop appearing before a certain point in time in the planet's history, roughly 10,000 years ago. Bart asks him what that means, to which Bal says it's likely there were no humans on this Earth past 10,000 years ago. Bart asks how he could work with the theory of evolution, to which Bal replies he doesn't believe in the ethos' teaching of evolution, instead of the old myths and legends, to which he tells the 2. They say that humans and God lived together in paradise in the sky. With God's protection, there was no fear of death, and the natural disasters were entirely unknown. Then, one day, humans ate a forbidden fruit which gave them incredible wisdom, but God drove mankind from their paradise for their sin. Bitter at having been driven out of paradise, humans used the wisdom they had to make giants. With these giants, they planned to challenge God himself, but God poured his wrath down on them. All who defied God were destroyed, but God himself did not escape unharmed. Taking paradise with him, the wounded God buried himself deep beneath the ocean to sleep for eons. Before going to sleep, God used his remaining power to create the right-hearted humans to live on this planet. He then finishes his story and tells the 2 of how they can exit the cave. They need to go around the cavern and switch off some sand sensors, that would allow Old Man Bal to open the way forward for them. After they complete the task, he does so, but before they leave for good, he has another myth he wishes to impart on them. He tells them about a powerful gear that sits on the planet far superior to any other. It was made in ancient times and hidden away because of its power. It was called the God Gear, a man-made god created with the wisdom of God. Such a gear would have the power of 1,000 gears. The two boys exit Balthazar's cave, pondering the idea of a hidden God Gear buried somewhere on the planet. Faye asks about what the chances are one of the gears they had recently excavated being this all-powerful gear, which Bart doubts. He says all recent gears have been buried to a point which they're only a few hundred years old, but records of the last few hundred years beyond are nearly non-existent, that the Ethos is the one control of all those records. All they have is access to what they uncover. Balthazar steps out of the cave hearing their conversation, and is shocked at the sight of Veltal. Panicked, he tells them that this vessel is the host for the Slayer of God, and bids them to leave immediately. Pondering this, the two leave the cave and re-enter their gears. The myths and legends of old weigh heavy on Faye's mind. The host of the Slayer of God. As the two leave the old man's cave, they return to their gears, and we continue. Faye and Bart continue past the wall that Old Man Bal has opened, and are ambushed by a giant white gear. Interesting thing of note, this gear is named Calamity, and is activated by a remote control that is controlled by Balthazar. We are going to be revisiting this much later on, but this is an oddity in the script here, as even with the Japanese version, no justification is given for Balthazar's reason for activating Calamity here. You could theorize it is to test the host for the Slayer of God, but there's nothing really concrete to pin down. Bart and Faye manage to subdue the gear, but before it's able to launch a counterattack, Faye uses an extremely powerful attack to obliterate it. Faye is confused at the source of his power. Bart questions why he couldn't use that kind of power earlier in their sparring match, but Faye is still confused as to where it even came from. He has no clue how he managed to do that. Bart lets it be, and thanks Faye for helping him out. The two manage to leave the caves together. They emerge onto the Avean Desert, where they can see the capital city, Bledavik. It's also important to note that this city's name is a misspelling of Breidablik, one of the halls of Asgard from Norse mythology. City names from here on out are all in some form of reference to mythology or religious allusion. Although due to the nature of Xenogears' translation largely being the project of one man, Richard Honeywood, after previous translators quit or asked to be reassigned due to the difficult nature of the Xenogears translation, these names will be a bit changed or misspelled from their religious connotations. Anyway, back to the boys in the desert. Bart suggests rounding back to the rendezvous point with the Yggdrasil, as an immediate frontal assault toward Bledavik would be stupid considering the current political situation in the capital. The two manage to dock their gears inside the Yggdrasil, and Faye meets up with Citan and Mazon after leaving Veltal. He regroups with the others, and Mazon formally introduces him to the Great Master Bartholomew, and chides Bart to apologize to Faye for his rashness. Sigurd appears and introduces himself to Faye. Bart half-heartedly apologizes, leading Sigurd to lead him away by the ear. Citan and Faye remain and investigate around the Yggdrasil, wherein they're free to outfit the Veltal and Bart's gear, the Brigadier, at their leisure. Faye and Citan find Maizen on the rec room behind the bar counter. Meeting back up with Bart and Sigurd at the helm of the ship, Sigurd confirms that they're headed toward their hideout, where they'll be able to stop for supplies and repairs. Docking at the hideout, some young kids approach Bart, and he's surprisingly gentle with them, and tosses them some amber to play with. Bart has Mazon lead Faye and Citan off to sit down to have some tea while he and Sigurd move separately. Mazon reveals that if things were normal, they wouldn't have to hide away in the outskirts of Bledavik, but instead be back in the royal palace. This comment is not unnoticed by Citan, who pokes for more information, but Mazon realizes he has spoken too much on private matters and clams up. Although Citan is quick on the reproach, he mentions Bart looks plenty similar to the last of the line of the royal family of Fatima. Mazon, almost excited to be able to openly talk about his young master's heritage, spills the details. Bart is the last in line of the once proud Fatima dynasty, at least before such was taken over by a cruel man named Shakan. Sidon confirms the information. Edbart IV was the last known ruler of Blennervik, and of Av as a whole. But recent events have shadowed the political climate of the capital city. Sidon speaks of the rumor that Bartholomew, the rumored heir to the throne, was said to have died of an illness a dozen years prior. Mason reveals that this is the official story, but he and Sigurd were able to rescue the young master from certain doom. Although, unfortunately, due to Shao Kahn's control over the capital city, Bart would most surely be executed among the public learning of his survival. So they have worked in secret as Pirates of the Sands. Mason says that his highest wish is for Bart to grow up to become a good man. He says that while they do have a desire to restore his rule to the kingdom, which he is destined to rule, but most importantly is his moral code. Mizan says that they do have a plan in the works on ousting Shao Kahn, but those some plans involve piracy that they've been so recently entrenched in. Av and Kislev have both been so hellbound on excavating the ruins around their nations. The strengths of each nation's armies are immense due to their resources available. He says that they've tried to excavate the ruins themselves with the Yggdrasil, but they're unable to provide the necessary time, labor, and capital in order to get the resources that would be worth it. Mizan says they use their tactics to steal from both sides, as it doesn't matter who gets more resources from the ruins, Av or Kislev. The one who does will simply use that power to oppress the other. Bart's ideology is to even the playing field and bring a sort of balance, all while solving their resource issue with a single decision. Mizan does admit pillaging is an unpardonable act, but to leave Av as it is, to leave Ignis as it is, and not do anything would be a worse fate. Sidon says as outsiders they can't comment, but from what Mizan has said, he feels the result of their actions will be beneficial overall. He asks about the plans they had in store and why they haven't put them into action yet. Mizan explains that they've been hesitant as Shao Kahn has a captive of a young girl named Margi, who holds the role of Great Mother. The queens of the Av dynasty have held this highly religious station that connects to a nearby county of Nisan. Margi, or in full Marguerite, is the current Great Mother of Nisan, but is as well Bart's first cousin, similarly making her surname Fatima. Mizan reveals that Shao Kahn has Margi captive because she's the key to unlocking the mystery of the Fatima Jasper, which is said to hold great treasure of historical importance. Something Shao Kahn has been vying for intensely. What has ensured her safety is that Margi has only half of the Jasper, with Bart having the other half. Faye and Sidon wonder on the nature of what the Jasper itself is, likening the guest to a necklace or gemstone of some sort. Mizan says that only Bart and Margi know what the Jaspers really are. Wondering then on the nature of the great treasure that lies beyond the mystery of the Fatima Jasper, Bart enters the room and says that it must be the gear. He says that a picture of a gear was inscribed on the Avayan picture scrolls, and offers to show the both of them what he means. Bart takes them to a large room with a screen on the floor. The workers display the image of the scroll below. He says the scroll depicts the first King Fatima, who formed a blood oath with the giant 500 years ago. The legend goes that he utilized the strength of the giant to found Av. Then, after the origin of the kingdom, Fatima had bid the giant to sleep, or to hibernate until the need for them were to return in the future, although their supposed slumbering place is unknown. Bart then reveals in another personal record the sleeping giant is dubbed the Great Fatima Treasure. Sidon asks of the Fatima Jasper, and Bart explains that it's the key to unlocking the treasure. Bart then asks the pair if they had helped rescue Margi from Shao Kahn, and Sidon is more than happy to oblige in return for room and board, although Faye is more hesitant to join along. He asks why everyone is always expecting him to fight, why everyone's expecting him to use this great power when he wants nothing to do with it. Coming back to Faye's point of view, we can see a short little scene by hiding out in Bart's room, where he tries to make a plan to speak to Faye, worrying over his condition. Now, if we go to the hatch that leads up to the deck, we can actually trigger this scene. Bart expresses concerns over Faye's situation. He reveals Sidon has told him about the situation in Lahan, and then apologizes for being a jerk. Faye thinks on the matter silently, and Bart changes the topic, hoping to steer for better conversation. The two talk on the matter of duty, and Bart says he doesn't like fighting either, but he has to in order to survive and protect those he loves. Faye reveals the insecurity surrounding Veltal, saying that anytime he enters the gear, people die, and he doesn't want people to get hurt. He would rather throw the whole matter away. Bart then explains it isn't Faye's fault Lahan ended up the way it did. It was the people that started the war, not the people who were forced to fight that were responsible for the casualties. Bart then leaves Faye to his thoughts, and says that the mechanics have some words for Faye about his gear in the hangar. After checking in, Sigurd and Citan both meet up with Faye, who wishes to show him something, and lead him to eavesdrop on a personal conversation Bart's having with himself about his father. After listening in and speaking with Sigurd more about personal responsibility, Faye decides it's time to rest, as it's been more than a busy day. In the night, 5 officers of Gebler and an unidentified large gear have infiltrated their base. The place is a chaotic turmoil, as the alarms are blaring all over the place. Faye meets up with Citan, who urges him to help in defense efforts and join with Veltal, asking if he still believes this problem doesn't affect him at all. Faye is frustrated, rejecting the idea at first, saying he doesn't wish to be the slayer of God. He doesn't want that power or the responsibility. Yet, he's still left thinking. Citan joins the efforts alongside Bart and a few of Bart's pirates, claiming that while his skills as a pilot are rusty, he is able to operate a gear to help. He jumps into a gear at Maison's expressed disagreement, as the gear he's jumped into is one that has a history of leaving its pilots with extreme injuries. Citan, though, the man of mystery as ever, is able to tame its more beastly nature, and is now in possession of the gear Heimdall, named after the god of light in Norse mythology. Citan is able to take out Breuer, one of the Gebler units, and rendezvous with Bart. Citan explains that the Gebler units are so strong because they're abusing a drug called Drive, effectively a Xenogears version of super steroids. Vance, another Gebler unit, finds some children who got separated from their family, and is gloating about how he'll enjoy the sounds they make when he crushes them. And suddenly, BAM! Veltal appears. Faye takes the fight to Vance to protect the 2 children, and he too is able to reunite with Bart and Citan. They all work together to repel the invading force, and at the conclusion of the fight, Bart gives a heartfelt thanks for the assistance. Faye says he still isn't sure what to do. He recognizes that Bart isn't fighting for his own gain, and he admires that he's able to walk his own path. Faye comes to the realization that he needs to find his own path, his own reason for fighting. But if they need his help, and he is in, and he's ready to help them save Margie. After this, the party all head toward Bledavik, where they learn that Shakan is holding a festival to celebrate the city's 500th year of being established. This festival includes a fighting tournament, because you can't be a 90s anime property without having a tournament arc. And I ain't hating. You gotta appreciate a good tournament arc when it comes up. Now, as we enter the main city, we get a scene here of a Gebler ship docking inside the city, as well as a cool slowed down version of the game's boss theme, Night of Fire. Now, I've been waiting a long while to talk about this song, but we haven't had a good opportunity to hear it in game yet. But Night of Fire is such a good theme, but it also has some cool lore. I'll play it a bit here, and we'll discuss some of it after. Now, a really cool video by Troy McQuinn goes into the exact details of this, but by digging into the game's files and seeing each instrument that's used inside the song, we can get a clear sample of the quote.
There is a particular track in the game's soundtrack that I find interesting. often used for tense situations and boss battles in the game's soundtrack that has a very interesting bit of audio. Obviously, for copyright reasons, I can't play the whole song, but here's how it starts. And then there's this passage, over the harp part, where there's a repeating voice sample sound that pans from left to right multiple times. To extract that voice clip and examine it more carefully, I used a PSF, or portable sound format, capture of the game's audio. Now, how to capture the game's music in PSF form is quite complicated and definitely beyond the scope of this video, but I'll decompress and extract all of the instrument samples from this piece using VGM Toolbox and pSound, which I've used in previous videos to extract audio samples from console BIOS firmware. Okay. Here are all the audio samples from this music track.
Total sentence imposed is 10.
The extracted audio says, total sentence imposed is 10.
Total sentence imposed is 10. Total sentence imposed is 10.
It's an excerpt from the audio from Christian Brando's sentencing. The oldest of the actor Marlon Brando's children, Christian Brando was found guilty of manslaughter in the shooting of his half-sister Cheyenne Brando's boyfriend. The shooting took place on May 16, 1990, and he was sentenced in Santa Monica, California on February 28, 1991 to 10 years in prison by Superior Court Judge Robert W. Thomas. The full audio is total sentence imposed is 10 years in the state prison.
Total sentence imposed is 10 years in the state prison.
It's Judge Thomas's voice that we hear in the audio clip used in the game. This audio was taken from the 2015 documentary Listen to Me, Marlon. As an odd coincidence, the background music from the documentary sounds just a little bit like the music that plays on the Xenogears soundtrack when this clip is used. Credit goes to Wizard517 for finding this clip and posting it on SoundCloud.
Honestly, this is one of my favorite fun facts about the game. Anyway, back in the ship we are introduced to two characters who are going to be very important moving forward. Karin Ramses and Miang. Now, I don't want to spoil exactly why, but Ramses here is one of my favorite characters from this game, and I'm going to talk about him quite a lot later bit on. The two generals dismount the ship and meet with Shao Kahn, who commends him over his victory over the Kislev units. Another general, this time of Av, Vanderkaum, tries to explain away his failings, but Ramses is having none of it. Also of note, Vanderkaum here is the first example of a recurring element within the Xeno series. We'll talk about more of this later in Xenosaga and much later in Xenoblade, but typically there is a commander of sorts who usually spots a facial marking or a tattoo or otherwise. Although more recently the series, the name has been changed to Vandom. Shao Kahn, Miang, and Ramses all head toward where Margi is being held, and Ramses is intent on making sure that while Margi is a prisoner, she is not to be physically tortured. He then asks Miang if the Great Fatima treasure is one of the relics they've been seeking. Miang agrees, but she says she hasn't noticed any response from it, that it must be protected by some sort of barrier. Ramses and Miang meet with Margi, and Ramses interrogates her on the location of the other half of the Fatima Jasper. Margi's personality shines through this interrogation, going so far as to ask for some chiffon Nissan the next time Ramses comes, and is clearly not giving any answers he needs. Shao Kahn, viewing the scene from the outside, is both frustrated that the information about the Jasper was leaked to the Gebler elite force, but also interested that Ramses was able to get Margi talking, even if it wasn't the information they needed. Shao Kahn wonders if the Ethos was responsible for the leak. And because it's been a while since they've been brought up, I'll do a quick refresher. The Ethos is the centralized church system that does not take any one kingdom or nation's side in the global war, but instead acts as an intermediary in the gear restoration efforts. Back to Shakan, he tells his attendant that it's about time to administer some truth serum to Margie, as it's imperative they find the Jasper before Ramses and Miang do. Also on Gibbler, as they've popped in on the story thus far, we've learned that they, like the Ethos, don't specifically align with either Ob or Kislev fully, although as of recent times they have been seen assisting Ob soldiers, since they have had the disadvantage against the much larger Kislev. This is an important distinction as it seems Gibbler intends to keep the fighting at an even point for their own motivations. Now we return back to Faye and the group as they enter Blooderick. The group find a hotel to stay at as they plan for their next steps. At the hotel, they meet up with a nun from the Church of Nisan, and she recognizes Bart, saying that they've already got a room prepared for him. Inside, the plan is for Faye to enter the fighting tournament and keep eyes focused there, while Bart sneaks into the palace through the sewers. As Faye goes to register for the tournament, there's a cool little thing here where you can choose the name you're introduced as. It kinda reminds me of that scene from Chapter 3 in Paper Mario The Thousand-Year Door, where you're given the name The Great Gonzalez as a fighting name. And man, do I ever want to make a comprehensive video talking about how much I love this game. But another day, another day. Anyway, we begin our mission, and this is really cool. Your gameplay is split between fighting as Faye and tunneling through the sewers as Bart. And the longer you take in one gives you more time to do in the other. But before we begin fighting proper, as Faye, we can enter this tent to see some of our competitors, and hey, it's Big Joe, bada bing, bada boom, he's back, and he introduces himself as the man who controls the world. And we're happy to see him back. Anyway, moving on to our secondary tent, we can see a strange masked person, and oh shit, it's Dan. Faye asks what Dan's doing here, and Dan immediately tells Faye that it's all his fault that Alice is dead. Before Faye can say anything further, the announcer calls for the beginning of the tournament. Dan leaves by telling Faye that he's the enemy of everyone in Lahan, which piques the masked man's curiosity, asking if Faye if he's from Lahan. And it's obvious that he and Dan have history. He tells Faye to have a fun fight and that he'll be watching, causing Faye to be confused on how the masked man knows his real name, as he had entered with the previous pseudonym. We swap over to Bart, who readies his part of the plan, and jumps into the spring hole that leads into the sewers. Cutting back to Shakan, he introduces the tournament as a blessing to those who fight on the front lines, and sacrifice themselves so they may retain safety and glory. He is met by Ramses and Miang, and Ramses confirms he's got no time for such gay revelry. Ramses, it's 2022, man, come on. Ramses said he's going to prepare to leave, and that he finds the act of such a tournament beneath him. But Miang counters, saying it seems to be mighty interesting. She decides to stay and overwatch the first match, Faye versus an opponent named Gonzalez. Huh, ain't that a coinkydink? Miang takes special interest in Faye as he approaches the arena. Faye manages to take down Gonzalez using his abilities, and going back to Bart, he continues to swim through the sewer maze, which brings back to mind that one moon dungeon from Majora's Mask. Now, one quick note about this tournament. It's possible to lose here, and if you do lose, you just continue on with Bart's portion uninterrupted until you reunite with Margie. And you do miss out on the rest of the matches, which includes one against Dan. Now, since the loss condition is one where you just get less story and lore, I'm obviously going to cover it as if we've been continuing fighting and winning. So, sometime in the next transition, Faye gets to fight the big man himself, Big Joe, hey, what's it to ya? But anyway, Joe is a pushover. He does minimal damage and just stands around with hankering for a cantankerous. Moving back to Bart, we find he's able to make it to the palace and does some stealthing. Metal Gear Solid, eat your heart out. Next up with Faye, he's facing a pill popper named Scud. No, not that Scud. Anyway, Scud's all about debuffs and status elements, so using your death blows like you have up to this point shouldn't be too difficult. Now, I'm going to immediately shift to the fight with Dan, as this is where the emotional turmoil begins. So you can choose to beat up Dan and reinforce his beliefs that Faye is the monster that destroyed everyone he loves, but if you defend and choose not to fight him, he'll continue to do wailing attacks on Faye, and unleash all of his pent-up anger and frustration. If you focus on healing and defenses, eventually he'll tire himself out and have unique dialogue, screaming at Faye to fight back. Faye says he couldn't bring himself to harm Dan, and Dan decides to run off, but not before throwing Alice's wedding dress to Faye, wanting him to look at it and never forget his responsibility for Alice's death. Funnily enough, before you swap back over to Bart, you can access the equipment screen and have Faye wear the wedding dress. And yes, it is better than any equipment you could have before this. Think about that for a moment. The sheer audacity of seeing Faye slip into this thing right in front of Dan. Anyway, back to Bart. He meets back up and continues his stealth around the palace some more, getting deeper and deeper within. Now, moving back over to Faye, we have the finals as Faye goes against the Masked Man, known only as Wiseman. This is an unwinnable fight. He dodges each of your moves and offers no counter moves, simply watching and testing Faye. It is also to be noted that this masked figure looks eerily identical to the same masked figure who brought Faye to Lahan all those years ago, making his reference to Lahan earlier all the more vexing. Wiseman asks Faye why he fights, and who he learned to fight from, to which Faye tosses aside, saying they're none of his business, that he's in the middle of finding his purpose in fighting. Wiseman then says that Faye isn't looking toward the future, only down at himself, and through that lens he'll only learn nothing. As Wiseman continues to tease Faye, he struggles, wondering if it truly is that time, then escapes, giving Faye the win. Now back over to Bart, we see he is reunited with Margie. But as soon as they begin their escape, they run into difficulty spike. I mean Ramses. So here we have a boss fight against Ramses with Miang hanging in the rear. She primarily just heals Ramses' wounds, so he's your main target. Now this fight is a huge difficulty spike because Ramses has the potential to do counter fighting, which is basically like if you were fighting Wobbuffet in Pokemon. So if you go attacking like normal, you're gonna get your butt handed to you. And Xenogears doesn't have a skip cutscene button, so you'll have to go back to your last save, which is not fun. However, if you defend and build up your AP, then you can launch a devastating series of death blows against all at once. Also, I just have to say it, there's a voice clip Bart has here as he's taunting Ramses, and it's just perfect. Jerk! Now, as you fight a bit, we'll see Faye come in and join the fight, asking if Bart and Margie are okay. Ramses, however, has flashbacks to a previous fight with being clad in red, who was single-handedly destroying gears using solely their fists. If you recall, the dream Faye had where he saw Groff and the two others standing off, this red-haired individual was present there. Ramses cuts into their talk and resumes the fight. But this time, at least it's 2-on-1 with Margie continuing her healing help as well. Employing the same strategy as before is finally enough to hold him off long enough for a horde of rats to come piling through, and distract the pair long enough for Faye and crew to escape down the elevator. Ramses, before doubling up his guard in pursuit, wonders if Faye is the person he remembers fighting that time ago, or if he merely wants him to be. Faye, Bart, and Margie continue running through Gebler's aerial dock. But then we switch over to Ellie, who is preparing things in her room as the alarm calling for their capture sounds off. And as she leaves, the trio smack right into her. Sensing other Gebler operatives nearby, she pulls them into her room until they pass. Bart is obviously confused at how Faye knows a Special Forces lieutenant of Gebler, and Ellie apologizes for not telling Faye earlier about her rank. Faye apologizes for lashing out at her before, and that he already knew her rank, as he overheard her incite and talking back in the woods. Ellie, not wanting to turn Faye over, tells them that they can escape through the gear hangar by hijacking a Gebler unit. Bart is reasonably suspicious of all of this, but Faye says that he made up his mind to trust her long ago. The trio are able to escape in the gear, and all Gebler forces are gathered to begin a full pursuit. Before Ramses is able to call his own gear, Wyvern, an officer comes up to him and says that Hugh has sent a message, causing Ramses to call off the immediate pursuit and calls his men back, wondering just what Hugh is doing down here. Back on the Yggdrasil, we reconvene with Margie, giving her story to Sigurd and Mason, but they were overall glad that she is saved, and reunited with the group. Their next plan will be to return Margie back to Nissan before coming up with a new plan to take back off. And that's where I think we'll end it here, as this video has been going on for quite some time. I hope you all have been enjoying this, and hope you are excited to tackle the next chunk of story as we finally make some forward progress, and learn more about this wide and wacky world. If you like this content, you can subscribe and see more like it. I've got other Explained series and other games I tend to hyperfixate on, such as the Nier Reincarnation mobile game, and as well as the Somnium Files. Also, if you want to further support my content, I've established a fan house, which you can subscribe to or even tip, and you can get bonus access to more content from me, such as early viewings of my videos before they go live on the channel, as well as early looks at my manuscripts as I'm writing them. Next time, we'll continue on in this journey and hopefully see Bart restored to his place on the throne, and see if we can't learn more about the mysterious forces of Kepler.